morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Yes, the topic today is a little different. We're going to talk about supply chain management, but particularly the concept of how do we keep counterfeit goods out of our legitimate supply chains. And in order to do that, we have to understand what's happening in the world of counterfeiting. It's all around us. The media does a decent job of bringing it to our attention when they find it. But the bigger issue is that good counterfeiters never get discovered and the products go undetected through the supply chain. I think in the old days we thought counterfeits were things that immediately harmed you if you ingested a pill that was fake, or if you drove a car that had fake brakes on it, that you would immediately know that you were dealing with fakes. Not so anymore. The counterfeiters are technologically advanced. Their job is to go undetected. So, for instance, the vitamin C tablets you had this morning, if they were fake but benign, you may not know it for years. You may not know that there's no therapy, if you will, in some of these products. Now, given where we live in the corridor of pharmaceuticals and healthcare between Connecticut and, say, Philadelphia, we're going to focus a little bit more on the pharmaceutical aspects of supply chain management and anti-counterfeiting, but this problem permeates all sectors of industry. And in order to share some thoughts and stimulate some conversation, we've got an illustrious panel. We've got someone from Big Pharma, Pfizer. Brian Johnson's going to talk a little bit about the patient safety aspects of this and how industry is coalescing around the need to counter the counterfeiters. And then Tony Orosz will give us a little bit from the government side. As a member of the Department of Homeland Security, he's a director in the Customs and Border Protection area out of New York City, and he'll tell us about some of the seizures that have taken place over the years of counterfeit goods, to give you some perspective on that. And then cybersecurity actually plays a key role here as well. So we're fortunate to have a local from FDU, Kiron Sharma, will speak to us about some cybersecurity perspectives. And then most importantly, we want to get you talking. So after some brief presentations by each of us, we'll have the panel come up here and you can fire away with any questions, thoughts, or insights that you have on the topic. What we're saying here is we're talking about a concept, a business discipline called brand protection. Sometimes it's called product integrity or supply chain security, but basically it's a new business discipline. And those of you who are just shaping your careers and thinking ahead of the future, this is a growing area that needs some specialization, needs some academics, as Jim mentioned. When you talk about supply chain management, there has to be an element of how to protect that supply chain. And so I think we're seeing some outreach between industry and the academic world, as well as obviously the public sector, to make this a deep-rooted discipline that we all can embrace. The whole point of this is to come up with strategies which are, you know, the right people, the right process, the right technology coming together to thwart the counterfeiters. And, you know, this is our immediate view of what a counterfeiter looks like, very clandestine, you know, hidden, but actually not so much. These are people who may have worked in the industry, they may have been distributors, wholesalers, importers, exporters, they know the trade, and that's why they're good at what they do. They're just doing it for profit. So let me begin with a question, and there's a rhetorical question here. What would you do, just to highlight how awkward this concept of brand protection is when you're dealing with legitimate business processes and you face something like this? So you've got a surgery business, and surgeon calls you and says that they're now aware at their hospital they've implanted 42 patients with what turns out to be fake mesh for hernia procedures. So you're the company whose brand was falsified. What do? Yeah, it's tough. You know, you might say, well, the first thing is call the lawyers, see what they have to say. But when you think about it, it's not your product. Your brand was on the package, but what would you do? Would you call those patients and say you've got fake goods, or is that the hospital's responsibility? How far do you take your accountability in this area? Do you recall all the product, the good product? Well, that's a good idea, except then the only thing out in the market is more fakes. You're waiting for an answer, aren't you? There really is none, okay? You manage it as, an insult and an injury, but for the most part, it's different than normal business practice. Here's another one. The FDA discovers that there's counterfeit versions of one of your branded drugs in the marketplace and ask you, the key here is they ask you to recall all other inventory of that drug until they can solve the problem, or at least bound it, as they say. So what do? Well, again, if you recall all the good stuff, then patients in need of therapy do not get it because you've taken it off the market, and it's more likely that they'll find their way to some of the fake product. So here's the real answer. You prevent it. You make sure that you're doing everything possible to have this no-tolerance policy to prevent these fakes from entering the legitimate supply chain so that hospital doesn't get it and the pharmacies don't get it and so forth. And there's a whole cascade of activities that happens upstream to allow you to do that. Counterfeiting is becoming very significant around the world, precipitated by a number of factors that we'll talk about in a minute, but it is being called the crime of the 21st century. Its sister crime is called illegal diversion. And if you think about you making genuine product and sell it directly to the end user, there's probably no chance that they're going to get a counterfeiter if you're a legitimate manufacturer with integrity of your supply upstream and downstream. But the minute that you invite in a third party to transport your goods, to distribute them and so forth, the gray market or the diversion of product is more likely to now bring in counterfeits. And we know about the consumer risk. We know about the reputation of your company and your brands. That's our risk. And also, it does affect your top and bottom line. When you think about it from an accounting standpoint, you've created demand for your product and somebody else is filling it. So you're losing that supply against the demand that you've created. So it's a large and growing business. How large, we don't know. There's no way of telling. Counterfeiters don't report. You can't go to any documents and say this is the size of the business. But experts try to put some order of magnitude, some scale to it. We think worldwide, again, in the U.S., we're more protected than the average country, thanks to people like Tony. But for the most part, 10% of world trade, as much as 10% could be counterfeit, equating to about $650 billion. And this is what we call cross-border trade. Who knows what's happening inside local markets? But it's growing at 20%. When you talk about drugs and medical devices, it is the third most counterfeited category because it is lucrative. The first being apparel, and the second being media products. So when you look at all consumer healthcare, medical devices, and pharmaceuticals, third most counterfeited category in the world. And the World Health Organization was bold enough to take a stab at what this means for pharmaceuticals, and they said that 8 to 10% of the world's supply could be fake. Now, again, the good news here in the U.S., it's much less than 1%, but in some parts of the world, in some particular prescription meds, it could be as high as 30, 40, 50%. But 1% is pretty good, right? No. 0.1% is not good. If it grew in this country to 1%, that would equate to 40 million prescriptions a year. That's how many prescriptions we write, over 4 billion. So 1% is not tolerable by any stretch. So the diverters enable counterfeits to sneak their product into this lateral trade, this side trade that goes on. So why is this happening? Many factors are fueling this. It's often been called a perfect storm. Free trade agreements around the world. We agree that global commerce is a good thing, but with it, you're inviting in some of the contamination that takes place in other markets. We, the U.S. and the Western world, Europe and the U.S. in particular, have capitalized the emerging markets. Now, this isn't an indictment on India and China and so forth. Tony has some statistics he'll share with you, but by and large, we're teaching people in those countries how to make our products, and they do a good job of replicating them, imitation being the sincerest form of flattery. So the emerging markets are huge contributors to the manufacture of counterfeit goods. Like I said, Asia's become the world's factory. Internet's a problem, particularly with pharmaceuticals, being able to purchase goods as a consumer off the internet. CanadaDrugs.com is located in Brazil. Lack of regulations. How does the FDA regulate what happens up there in the cloud? Okay? The key is we don't know the source of supply. Counterfeiters are well-funded, very technologically advanced. Again, they put a lot of their investment into packaging because you only have to fool the inspectors. You don't have to fool the consumer, because once the consumer sees that something's fake, the counterfeiters made their money, they're long gone and not to be detected. We are under-resourced in our law enforcement and regulatory agencies, and there are so many of them trying to fight this battle. Again, communications across agency lines is often difficult. It is profitable. It's been said that a lot of the new wave of counterfeiters used to deal in heroin, cocaine, and so forth, but the reward to risk ratio is much greater in this area. And then some countries, as you know, don't have the same appreciation and respect for intellectual property as we have in this country, and therefore they're not bound by those rules. Some countries themselves have said, we're just not going to honor IP from other countries because it stifles economic development here locally. And then, as mentioned, the liberalization of trade across borders. But mostly, we don't really have as much control as you think of our supply chains. And that's why supply chain management is such an important discipline to strengthen when it comes to trying to fight the battle of counterfeiters. When you talk about risk, it generally resides in these three areas. That you've got natural product risks. So Pfizer's the dubious owner of a drug that is claimed to be the world's most counterfeit drug. Brian can talk about that. But Viagra is a lifestyle drug that sometimes doesn't have the same scrutiny that other prescription meds have. So it's highly counterfeited. So the risk is associated with the product type or the category of drug. Oncology drugs, another big target of counterfeiters, and it's really devious when you think about counterfeiting an oncology drug for a patient in need. But again, if the patient's not responding to therapy, a doctor may not suspect that it's because the drug is fake. They're just saying the disease is winning the battle. There's also risk associated with the supply chain, meaning the channel of trade. Depending upon where you're shipping that product and who's using it, there's more lateral trade, there are more steps in the supply chain, handoffs and so forth, and of course the geography risk. Like I said, certain countries have more risk than others. There are vulnerabilities in the supply chain. This is our work to be done. This is where we need to clean up our act. I'm not going to go through this, but when you add up the risk associated with each of these 10 vulnerabilities, you can see why we have vulnerable supply chains, even when legitimate people are managing them. I will call your attention to number 10, because some studies have been done about consumer attitudes around risk, around counterfeits. And they're saying that, you know, the complicity of the consumer is that if they can get a bargain, they will assume that it's either a genuine or something called a generic, meaning it is therapeutic or it does function as the branded product, but it's just less expensive. So again, there's an education that needs to take place with consumers around this. So what is the world of brand protection? As I mentioned, it's a business discipline, and it really focuses on securing product integrity and all that embodies, meaning your strategic direction as a company, your discipline around how you manage your distributors, your import-export practices, and so forth, and also working with the public sector. Because when industry and the public sector works with industry, and Brian's going to go into this, good things can happen. It is people, process, and technology, and if you look at companies that are really strong in this area, you'll see that they've got well-defined practices and technologies that they're adopting to protect those brands. These are some of the technologies. You may be familiar with some. I think the first wave of technology hitting the anti-counterfeiting space was holograms on packaging. You know, the sexy holograms were going to deter counterfeiters from selecting those brands. Well, the counterfeiters make better holograms than the genuine products do at this point, and sometimes you'll see holograms on packages that the branded product doesn't have, just because counterfeiters like to show off. Then you've got a number of other technologies to help authenticate the package or the product inside. I think one of the new waves of technology that needs further development, but they're effective, is to have mobile apps where you can do authentication of the product, the verification of the integrity of the product on site. When that happens, then you're more likely to catch the counterfeiter in the act because you're authenticating at that point. I often talk about, you know, how you see in the movies when there's a cocaine trade going on, you know, they're huddled in a dark room somewhere and someone tastes the goods, and if it's not good, the person selling it gets shot. We don't have that in the pharmaceutical world, but what we're trying to do is at least have that taste test in the form of authenticating the product at a point of sale. And the government's working on some laws and regulations that'll help create this integrity of handoff. But also, we need the consumer more involved, whether it be using QR codes to connect back to a legitimate website and help authenticate the product. More and more has to happen. So my summary is that there's a new reality here, particularly in pharmaceuticals, but throughout all product security. The new reality is that it's a growing problem and it's affecting all of us in all of our goods, whether they're professional goods, business to business, or business to consumer. We all have a shared responsibility to bring our expertise forward and to coalesce around how do we stop this, how do we safeguard the supply of goods, preserving your brand reputation, your image as a company, and preserving the consumer, the health and safety of the consumers and patients that use your product is foremost should be part of your credo as a company, but it also impacts your top and bottom line. There's a competency that is emerging, and it's not there enough. It's an immature discipline and needs more to figure out how do we manage our supply chains with integrity in mind. And then lastly, the call to action is to really adopt these measures proactively and to look at the exploration of new technologies, because we can't be everywhere, but what are the technologies that we need to develop and share with the agencies and so forth. That's my spiel. We're going to have time for questions after the presenters, so it's now my pleasure to bring up Brian Johnson.
Ron's done a really good job of laying out the business case for why we're starting to see this, what's happening in our industry, what's happening from a criminal point of view, and everything he said is spot on in terms of this is a really growing issue. So I use this opening slide in a number of my presentations because my angle on this, I'm in the pharmaceutical industry. Pfizer makes products to extend people's lives, to help you get better. And to have criminals engage in counterfeiting or product diversion or falsification and undermining our business, and more importantly, undermining patients' ability to get better, is just tragic and unacceptable. So as an industry, it's time to act, and for many of the reasons that Ron has covered. So I'm going to, if I can figure out how to, okay. Take a look at this. This is a article from the Wall Street Journal in May of last year. Read it. Think about the significance from a patient safety perspective. So this is one seizure in one market for malaria. And if a person in this market doesn't get their medicine, they're going to die. This one seizure could have supplied half the market in this one seizure. Do you think this is the only seizure that was caught in this market? So you start thinking about it from a patient safety perspective and how brazen counterfeiters are and the impact on patient safety. This is life and death, right? Couple comments. In some markets around the world, there have been studies where researchers will go into a market, purchase product from the legitimate supply chain, pharmacies as we would see it in the US. And not just 30%, in some markets, 70 to 80% of every product in that pharmacy is falsified, meaning it in and of itself could hurt you. It's not going to help you unless it's a really good counterfeit. 70% of every product in the legitimate supply chain in some developing markets are falsified. The same researchers estimate that upwards of 100,000 people die a year just in Africa alone because of falsified medicines. 100,000 people a year? Why is that not on 60 Minutes? I believe those numbers, and there's some pretty smart people that have done that research. It's an amazingly horrific crime that we're trying to deal with. We're in the pharmaceutical industry to save people, and we're fighting a war against criminals who are killing people. That's the bottom line here. So these are headlines that have happened over the last few years that some people may recognize. Issues in Latin America with cough syrup. Heparin in the United States, which is not necessarily a counterfeit good, but it's an adulterated good, where somebody decided that it would be cheaper to make the product with different ingredients, and they don't really care that those different ingredients will kill people. They're just making it cheaper. This person who was testifying in Congress in the US, both his wife and his son died because of taking contaminated heparin. Infant formula in Asia. So instead of putting protein in infant formula from dairy, somebody thought it would be neat to substitute that with a material called melamine. And the reason they're substituting it with melamine is when we test the product, melamine will actually show up as protein with these non-specific assays that are used. So when we test the product, it looks good, goes on the market, infants are given it, and infants die. They're not getting any nutrition in it, and it causes kidney failure. And they're making money off of it and don't really care what's happening to patients. So my number one message to you from a Pfizer perspective and an industry perspective, it's about patients and it's about patient safety. And there are financial implications to this crime, but think of what's happening to patients. And you are all patients, and you all go to a pharmacy, and you all expect to get legitimate product. That's something that in some markets, people don't take for granted. In the US, Ron made a good point. We have great regulatory oversight, we have great enforcement, we still have problems with it. We can take for granted what we're getting at the pharmacy is legitimate. Many markets, consumers do not make that assumption, but they have no other choice. All right. Here are some just trends that I sort of see, but I guess the bottom line here, instead of going through each one of these, the problems are growing. And it's not just in the counterfeit space, it is also in what we call substandards, where a manufacturer can manufacture a product in an emerging market and introduce that product in another emerging market that doesn't have the regulatory infrastructure to regulate that the product is made appropriately, called substandards. And those are every bit as dangerous as counterfeit goods. Actually, some good counterfeiters probably make a better product than some generic firms that are trying to get into emerging markets and trying to cut corners. Okay? Ron didn't mention theft, but theft is a big issue in the industry. And theft is not just we're losing our product. Theft is when a criminal steals product from the legitimate supply chain, do you think that they care what they do with the product? Do they keep it under, the appropriate storage conditions? They don't care. They'll reintroduce that product. They may reintroduce it 2 years, 3 years after. If you have a cold chain product like insulin, if you're a diabetic, you have a cold chain product that's stolen, criminals sit on it in a warehouse and reintroduce it into the market 3 years later. That product is not going to help you. It may kill you. And that has actually happened in the United States. It happens around the world. That's what we're up against. And the trends are all going in the wrong direction. So what are we doing about it? The roles that are starting to be developed, so Ron made a point of this is a new discipline. So in pharmaceutical companies, brand protection programs, supply chain security programs, people like Ron and I have jobs doing this and fighting criminals along with law enforcement folks. And we're focusing on the supply chain aspects. It is absolutely a discipline that we need going forward in the future. So I do that at Pfizer. I also chair a consortium called RX360. RX360 was launched in the US after heparin. And the cry from Congress to the industry and to the Food and Drug Administration, what are you guys doing about these issues? How can heparin hit the US market and how can this happen? So we launched RX360, a number of pharmaceutical executives from the large multinationals. We got to do something about this and we got to do something together. We created RX360 and this is the mission of RX360. Patient safety focused on supply chain integrity. We need to work together. And the skills that J&J has, we need to share with Merck, and we need to share it with Pfizer, and we need to share it with Lilly. And this is an area where we don't compete. We share, and we help each other protect the supply chain. Because the crimes are not targeted at a particular product or company. These are opportunistic crimes. They'll do anything they can to get into the legitimate supply chain the easiest way that they can. So we're all victims. So what is RX360 focusing on? So RX360, I think we have 80 members right now. All the large multinationals are members, and we work together in this space. So we're working on 3 main buckets of work. One is education, intelligence, data sharing. We do a lot of sharing of information of what happened to us, what we know around the world, what we know are risks in certain markets, to help each other with the integrity of the supply chain. And so if you are, one recommendation I would make, if you're interested in this space, sign up for free to the RX360 website, and you will start getting notifications of issues happening around the world. It's fascinating. It's sad, but it's fascinating. And if you want to do something about it, the intelligence is critical. We also do what we call supply chain security, and this is where industry is developing tools, white papers, practices from the best in the industry around certain threats. And we're publishing that information for free, and anybody who wants to use that, whether you're a small company, a mid-sized company or a large multinational, steal it, use it, we're in this together. And then the other thing that we're doing is when you think about the heparin incident. So heparin, the issue with heparin started with raw materials back in China. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, how do you have control over your entire supply chain, even if it reaches back into starting raw materials back in China? Well, if it's my product, I have a responsibility to that supply chain. So companies got together and said, we really need to start working together and gaining better transparency on the supply chain, which Ron mentioned. And we do that in our industry through audits. And can't we work together on audits of the supply chain? So we have a whole work stream on doing that. This is where we're currently working. These are some of the supply chain security or brand protection or supply chain integrity initiatives. We're working on understanding the upstream risks. We have a team working on what we call high-risk cargo theft. There are markets in the world where 2 out of 10 trucks get hit, meaning get physically hit and stolen en route in certain markets. And those are what we call high-risk markets. Threat reporting and data sharing. We've got a group working on that. Serialization in and around the world is becoming a big issue. One of the ways that we're trying to enhance the integrity of our supply chains, put a serial number on a product, trace it through the supply chain as it hands off until it gets to the end user. That's not going to solve all of our problems, but legislation around the world is popping up in various markets, and we're doing a lot of work in that space. And good distribution practices in Africa. Africa doesn't have the infrastructure to safely get products to patients. We know how to do this as an industry, and we're trying to help in that market. And this is my last slide. These are some of the work efforts that we've already done. So we've done work on what does a brand protection program look like at a company? What do you need to have? What are the key systems and processes? How do you fight diversion? How do you fight counterfeiting? What are the risks with drug shortages? How do you manage an issue? Ron gave us a couple good examples. How do you manage those issues in a company? How do you make those decisions when you have your supply chain breached? So really good material. Again, all of this is also available on the RX360 website. As the chair of the organization, I'm not here plugging it. I'm here to talk about patient safety and what industry is doing about it. This is the only consortia or trade organization that's focused on this issue. And we have it sitting at the table, industry, distributors, regulators, and many people from the cross-section of getting products discovered, produced, and distributed. And we hope that we're being pretty effective. So that's my comments. Thank you.
As you can see, Brian's been a real pioneer in this space, focusing everyone's attention on the patient safety aspects. But if you didn't glean it from his slides, he is the father of that RX360 effort, which has coalesced an industry that typically is very fragmented, and they don't speak to each other because of all kinds of rules around collusion and so on. But Brian has found this safe haven to bring everyone together and say, look, we're focused on a common entity, and that's the patient. And let's share our best learnings, let's share our data, let's share our best practices. So it's been a very effective, bright light in the storm here, in that perfect storm. Shifting gears now, we've got Tony Orosz going to talk to us about what's happening at the borders and some of the statistics that they find relative to kind of put this all in perspective as to what kind of counterfeits are they finding. So Tony, I think we need a change.
Thanks, Ron. My name is Anthony Orosz. I'm the Assistant Director of the Pharmaceutical Health and Chemical Center of Excellence and Expertise. I know that's a mouthful. I've been with Customs and Border Protection for going on 20 years now. Before I was with the CEE, and I'll get into that in a second, I was a customs inspector at JFK Airport, so I've seen this stuff coming in at the border. and I was also with the CTPAT program before the CEEs, so I've dealt with supply chains for quite some time now. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the CEE is, and then get into what we do as far as enforcement and IPR enforcement goes. But what the centers are, basically, it's a new concept within customs, and each center is going to be assigned a commodity or commodities. It's been going on for about 2 years now. There are 10 centers. The one in New York, which I'm the assistant director, we're in charge of the pharmaceuticals, the health, and the chemical industries, okay? We're based in New York because a lot of the pharmaceutical companies are located here in New York, but there are 10 other ones. Detroit obviously would be the automotive center. Los Angeles is the electronics center, and because of the electronic companies based out in Los Angeles. Houston is petroleum because a lot of petroleum industries in Houston, and so forth. We have 3 main jobs at the centers here. I'll get into the main one, which I'm here to talk about, is enhanced enforcement, but to facilitate legitimate trade through customs. Like I said, this is a new concept. We're going to be the one central point of contact for the entire pharmaceutical industry. So basically what I'm saying is, if you're a pharmaceutical company or you're dealing with pharmaceuticals and you're importing or exporting into the United States, you're going to deal with us in New York at the Pharmaceutical Center, okay? That's our main position. We're also trying to increase industry-based knowledge within Customs and Border Protection. We want to have experts on our side within the government who are experts on importing and exporting pharmaceuticals. And the one I'm here to talk about is enhanced enforcement and address industry risks. And I'll show you how we do that in a second. Basically, what we're dealing with is pharmaceutical, health, and chemicals. We see a lot of the counterfeit drugs coming into the country. I'll just speak off the cuff here. Basically what we do, since we're located in New York now, a lot of the drugs, the pharmaceutical, the counterfeits, they come through the mail. It's just the easiest way to come through to get it into the country. So we're seeing a lot of the IPR seizures and interdictions in the mail facilities coming into the United States. And JFK has a huge mail facility. So we go out there at least once a quarter. We take people out there and we work with the officers and we try to seize as much counterfeit drugs as we can. And we can seize usually up to about 100 to 150 counterfeit packages a day consisting of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. A bulk of it is from India and China, and I'll show you a slide on that in a second. But also we see Pakistan, we see other Middle Eastern countries, and a lot of this has been led back to funding terrorism. So we look at counterfeits, DEA-controlled substances. A lot of times we see the Xanax coming in, the Ambien coming in. It's not exactly counterfeit. It has the active ingredient, but it's not authorized to be imported into the country, so we'll seize that also. And any other FDA unapproved, substandard, or adulterated pharmaceutical coming into the country. Last year, here's some of the stats that we had. This is not just pharmaceutical, this is total IPR seizures. When I say total IPR, it could mean pharmaceutical, it could mean handbags. I have a slide next that I'll get into what it's broken down into. So there was over 24,000 total seizures, CBP, in all the border ports last year that the CBP officers have seized. So that's a lot of seizures. That's a lot of counterfeits coming in. Almost $2 billion MSRP. We also work with ICE, the investigators. If we see something at the border, we'll call the investigators and they'll open up a case a lot of times. There's large counterfeiting networks out there. They shut down almost 1,500 websites last year, but the trouble with shutting down the websites is there's usually large networks of websites, and as soon as it's playing whack-a-mole, and as soon as you shut one down, another one pops up, basically. So it's tough shutting down the websites, as you talked about Canada Drugs and the other websites out there. Most people think they can go on the internet and order these drugs and they're legitimate drugs, but guess what? They're not. If you're ordering drugs off the internet and it's cheaper, it's not the legitimate drug. It's a counterfeit. It doesn't have the active ingredient, and that's part of our job too, is educating the consumer that if you're ordering drugs off the internet, something's probably wrong there, not to do that. And we almost 700 arrests from from some of our seizures that we've made in the facilities where we go to. What we do basically is once we get the funding, is passed, and we're actually planning this right now. We go all around the country to the different mail or express consignment facilities. San Francisco, LA, Memphis, JFK, and Miami we have planned for next year. And what we do is we take a team and we go to those facilities and we work there for a week, and we focus on the pharma, but the other centers can focus, the apparel center could focus on the fake Tommy Hilfiger sweaters coming in, and the handbags and different things like that, but we focus on the pharma. So we'll take a team to all those different ports that I just mentioned. We'll hit the mail facilities, the DHL, the UPS facilities, and we'll x-ray packages as they come into the country, and we'll look for pharmaceuticals. If we see pharmaceuticals in there, we'll open up the packages, and a lot of the time it's counterfeit or illegally imported pharmaceuticals. So that's how we interdict it now at the border. And keep in mind, they're doing this day to day at the borders. Our officers are well aware of what's coming in, and we provide them training. We work with Pfizer and the Eli Lillys. They provide us training on how to spot the counterfeits, PowerPoint guides they give us, what to look for, what not to look for, tricks of the trade. So we know, we're the experts on how to spot these things at the border, and we pass this training on when we go out to the ports on how to spot these things to our officers in the field also, so they know how to, if they see it in the mail, they can seize it properly. These are the seizures by commodity. Obviously, handbags and the wallets, it's huge. Everybody, all the ladies like their Louis Vuittons. But when you go down Canal Street or you go on the internet and you buy your fake Louis Vuitton, you're doing more damage than you think you are. Let's put it that way. A lot of the funding for these IPR seizures, a lot of the money going back funds terrorism. It's been traced back to that too. It's a way for different, terrorist or organized crime rings to get there to be funded. So a lot of times you're not thinking you're doing any harm by buying these counterfeit goods, but you really are. To stay away from these. The handbags and the wallet, obviously they're huge. You can get them on the internet, you can get them on the street. Watches and jewelry, of course, consumer electronics, even going in and buying those fake DVDs, not a good idea. Wearing apparel, and pharma is actually a very small, it's only 3% of what we seized last year. But if this was by value, it would be up there. It would be a lot higher because the pharmaceutical is very expensive compared to a handbag or a sweater or a counterfeit football jersey that's coming in the country. We do see a lot of the Viagra and the Cialis, the lifestyle drugs. A ton of those are coming in, and I have the countries from which they come in. When we go to JFK, we can make 100 seizures in a few days. I would say half is from China and half is from India, with a handful from Pakistan and some other countries. And we also see the OxyContin coming in, counterfeit. We work with Purdue Pharma, the company who produces OxyContin, also on how to spot that. Those are our three big ones that we see a lot of counterfeits. But we've also seen counterfeit cancer medication coming in and other medication, which could be potentially very dangerous, since a lot of times, some of the times we've worked with the investigators, and these drugs are actually going to doctors in the United States, if you can believe that. You have doctors ordering drugs over the internet, I guess because it's cheaper. We found doctors selling drugs on Craigslist, counterfeits. Whether they know it's counterfeit or not, I don't know. They probably do. I would assume they do if they're ordering it on the internet and they're legitimate doctors. But these are just some of the dangers you get from the pharmaceuticals coming in the country, and it's coming in fast and furious. Like I said, we deal with mostly China and India and Pakistan. Obviously, the other ones, Hong Kong, I think you can kind of group into China, because a lot of it coming from Hong Kong is originating in China and it's just being shipped through Hong Kong. So China, India, the other countries are a lot of the Asian countries, Malaysia, Indonesia. They produce a lot of the counterfeit wearing apparel. We see a lot coming from Indonesia and Malaysia also. And as you can see, Express and Mail. Express, like I said, is DHL, FedEx. We go to those facilities. If it's pharma, obviously wearing apparel, it could take its time, go in a container. It could take 2 weeks to get here. It's not a big deal. Pharma, they're a little more, they prioritize their freight a little bit more, and they want it over here fast and quick, and they want to get it out there. So a lot of times we'll see it FedExed over here in just a few thousand pills at a time. but they'll try to FedEx it over, or they'll mail it over in regular mail, and we X-ray all of that mail coming into the country. We have countries that we focus on coming into the country at these mail facilities that we we look at the freight. So we have some countries we look at a little bit more than others, and we look at that freight. We know where it's coming from, and we can spot it pretty quickly. Last year, just with about a staff of 20 in our pharmaceutical center, and keep in mind, this is growing. We're still in the infancy of the pharmaceutical center now, so it's going to grow to about 100 in the next 12 to 18 months. We made 409 seizures. That's with the operations that we actually went out there and x-rayed goods, and we seized it. Also, we do targeting within our systems, with the custom systems, that we can go in and advance target any FedEx, UPS, packages that are coming in. We can look, this is coming from China, this looks suspicious. We can hold it at the border, and we can have our officers look at it anywhere throughout the country and tell us if it's counterfeit or illegally imported pharmaceuticals. So we can target from our desks in New York throughout the country. We can't do that with regular mail because there's no manifest information, but with the Express, with the FedEx, we can, which is they provide us advanced data. We can target that coming into the country without actually being there. We can see it in the computer and target it. So that's a lot of probably half of our seizures come from advanced targeting. And you can see we have over 200,000 pills. I think we made almost 100,000 in one operation in JFK. So when we get more staff, we'll be able to increase those numbers dramatically, hopefully. We see a lot of steroids coming in from Mexico and from Turkey. Some European countries, they import the steroids a lot. You get the vials, you get the pills. Schedule 1 and 2, that could be the Oxycontin, that could be a number of things. And we have the bath salts now, which is a whole nother issue we're dealing with. It comes in powder, looks like a big bag of cocaine, basically. And it's a precursor chemical to make the bath salts or the synthetic marijuana. And that comes in big bags, pounds, and probably 100 pounds at a time a lot of times. And we also have capsule filling machines or pill presses that they try to import into the United States, so they get the product in here, and then they can actually produce it here in the United States, and it's a lot easier. Or they don't even have to have the product. A lot of times these counterfeits don't have any of the active ingredient, or a very small amount of the active ingredient in there. So they would just grab the pills and the pill presses and produce it here in the United States and produce it and send it out. And like I said, our staff's going to be increasing coming up. So hopefully we can increase the volume of seizures in fiscal year 14. And we're still looking at the same. We're working with the different DEA, ICE, FBI, different agencies. We work with German and French customs. They send us information. If French customs sees something in the mail coming to the United States, they'll actually call me and let me know, hey, on this flight, on the Air France flight 002 coming in JFK, we found some pharmaceuticals coming in. Could you guys check it out? And we'll meet the flight the next day, and we'll actually check it out. So they're looking overseas and letting us know what's coming in, the Foreign Customs Administration. So we have a lot of different ways of interdicting the illegal or counterfeit pharmaceuticals coming in the United States. I could talk on this. I have 10 or 15 minutes now. I'm almost up. But I could probably talk on this for about an hour or two on on the different things we do and how we receive the information. And there's just a layered strategy, I like to call it. We have different layers. We have our own targeting teams. We have actually the boots on the ground officers. We have the advanced information. Then we have the informants to the investigators. We have the foreign customs agencies. We just have so many layers of information coming our way to help interdict these counterfeit pharmaceuticals, and it's a huge business. That, in a nutshell, is the pharmaceutical center. One aspect of the pharmaceutical center, at least, how we interdicted the counterfeit pharma, and I'll be able to take questions when we're done here. But if you have any questions for me, this is the general line, and I'm the only one in the office. We have a remote staff for the most part, so I'm the only one in there actually answering this line right now. So if you call a line, you'll get me. Or we have general mailboxes. If you have any email questions, you can send it to me and to our staff at the email, and we can answer any questions you may have, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm glad there are people like Anthony out there. I feel guilty having him here. Get back to work, man. Keep going. Our fourth speaker is Kiron Sharma, who's going to talk to us about the cybersecurity aspects of all this.
Good morning, everyone. This is good. I'm Kiron Sharma, and I'll be talking to you about the general cybersecurity aspect. I'm a faculty member here at Fairleigh Dickinson University, so I'm local right here. And we have a Center of Cybersecurity in Information Assurance, relatively new, about a year and a half. And we have a faculty from all disciplines at Fairleigh Dickinson University involved with the center. I'm going to take you right into cybersecurity right here. Okay. So President Xi Jinping has put himself in charge of the new body in China to coordinate cybersecurity efforts. Our competitors take this seriously, so it must be addressed at the senior-most levels as well for us. So cybersecurity covers large issues with data, with networks, with infrastructure support. And we are, of course, focusing here on pharmaceutical. We are focusing on the supply chain. But I'll give you a little background on where cybersecurity starts. So it's a state of being protected against the criminal and unauthorized use of electronic data. It can take many, many facets. We also refer to it by internet IT security. So it could be computers, programs, data, unintended, unauthorized use, change of data, destruction of data. And last year, the top national security experts warned that cyber attacks and digital spying is the top threat, and it eclipses terrorism threats for our nation. We are looking at data from all aspects, and we are looking at data locally, web-based. Our prime targets, of course, are high-profit verticals, as you can imagine. Okay? It's all about the money. It's all about the dollars. So pharmaceutical, chemical industries, and electronic manufacturing are our target groups in cyber attacks. So we're talking about the business aspects, not the government aspect here. So the business industries, these are the high target industries. After the fact, we can ask many questions. And this is after the attack has happened. And we have lost either data, we have lost information. We can say what happened, why did it happen, what were the motivations, and how can we prevent it. But it's probably too late at that point. Okay? The losses are already cut in there. There are many, many dimensions that I mentioned earlier. So let's look at simple. We are focusing on the pharma industry here. We have pharmaceutical data. And obviously, this is not local data in today's world. It's across many, many locations. So it's distributed in many, many ways. Right on top of that data, we need to have cryptic controls and levels of encryption. So for example, not all kinds of data needs to be encrypted because encryption is expensive. Okay? It takes time, it takes money, and it has to be updated. So levels of cryptic control, what is the important data that we need to codify so that our adversaries cannot access it easily? Governance is an important piece directly on the data in each location of data. So governance, continuous monitoring and dashboards. Where is the data going? Where is it coming from? Who's updating it? So continuous dashboard updates. Then we have access controls. Physical access to data. Access to rules and regulations. Who knows what the rules are? Okay, forget who knows who can access the data, but who knows who's setting up those rules? What are those rules? That's important to God, because if I know the rules of your organization, then I can find a way out to access your data as well, possibly. Audit trails. Who accesses the data and when was it done? Okay. Okay, so all the trails, back up. Let's see who's been accessing, what are the trends. Controls based on kind of data and information, okay? So information is encrypted maybe at multiple layers. Okay, so if you're accessing, the employees are accessing data, there might be some kind of encryption. If that information and data is being sent out of the organization, what kind of encryptions are being used? Who's monitoring those encryptions? And then, of course, administrative controls, the hierarchical structures, the IDs, and the super IDs. Okay? What level of control do you want to give to what level of employees? Okay? How much do you trust whom at what level? And then when your employees leave, or are they also connected with another group? How do you control that information? What information do you keep about your employees? How do you generate those IDs? Okay? So these are really deep-rooted issues, and it has to be looked from a very top-level strategic point. And then you add web access. Okay? We were right there at the data center. You add web access, and then you let it all sit, or at least a part of it on the cloud. So dimensions increase multifolds right there. You have computing devices, you have tablets and smartphones, and I can access the network from anywhere. You have public networks, you have private networks. There are internets, so you need to have regulations on each axis. Regulations on what kind of information can be accessed on what kind of devices. So I have a question to ask you. Let's say we are in an organization, large organization. How long do you think it takes for an organization to detect an adversary? In general, let's say, is a week enough? So an adversary is there, getting information, getting data. A week is a long time, right? Lots and lots of hours and minutes and seconds. Do we think that large organizations are able to detect attacks within a week? Within 2 weeks? Within a month? Possibly. A month seems a long time, right? I'll give you data and it'll be surprising how long adversaries can sit in your system, gather data, see all your information exchange, and the organizations have no clue where, how, and what happened. Okay? It's much later, most of the time, that adversary is detected. And then you have to go fetch the intentions. What was the adversary doing? Why were they getting our data? What will they do with our data? Because they may not act right away with your data or information they have. They'll probably use it much later when your guards are down again. Right? So it's a constant level check that has to be taking place all the time. Tools and concepts. So a good piece in cybersecurity is that you're not only looking to protect yourself, but the idea of cybersecurity is that you want to attack the adversaries. You want to go there and stop them before they come attack you. Okay, that's a big piece in cybersecurity. Not only protecting your own circumference, your own area, your own data, but going after the adversaries and shutting down their operations before they come in and attack you. Well, if you have smart adversaries, detection is difficult, like I said. So here is the median number of days. 2013, 243 days that the attackers were present in a victim's network before detection. That is way more than 1 month. Okay. And those are real figures, okay? And we've done well. 2011, the number was 416 days, median number of days that the attackers were in the system before the organizations detected anything was going on. Okay? You've lost a lot of information in that period of time. Okay? It's a serious issue. Then we have advanced persistent threats. So you might have heard about APT groups. So they will try to attack the data centers. They cannot get in. They'll try again in many different ways. So these are persistent threats. They will try again and again. So the APT groups are smart. They learn. Each time they're unsuccessful getting into the system, they'll adapt. They'll know a little bit more about the system so they can get a little bit deeper in. Okay? A lot of APT groups are based out of China and Southeast Asia. So what do we need to do in the business world to protect the data centers, maybe in the pharma industry? A continuous response on daily basis. So it's a part of the business process setup. Understanding that intruders will eventually get in and compromise the enterprise. So each time you have to build more and more layers of security, update your security, update how that information is shared. Who has the information about security updates? And of course, disrupt the intruders before they can complete their mission. Disrupt and probably destruct their enterprise. And not a single organization can, of course, not do it, so it's a collaborative effort that has to take place. Top enterprises will balance people, products, processes, and partnerships to meet this goal. Partnerships within industry, partnerships with industry and government, as we have seen here. Okay? That's important. An individual organization cannot remove the adversaries on their own. So here is data from 2013, and industry risk and web malware. So the first line that you see after the 0 starting off, the 100, is the normal risk of an industry. Pharmaceutical, about 625%, more than normal. The other areas are energy and oil, electronic manufacturing, and agriculture and mining. Those are high-risk industries with web malware and security issues. So if you go into, for example, utilities, more than normal, but not so much more, as compared to pharmaceutical, as compared to electronic manufacturing. Repeated cyber attacks. So this is when an adversary may or may not have been successful the first time around. Repeated cyber attacks. Pharmaceutical, right up there. Okay. Aerospace, defense under constant attack from the adversaries. Energy and oil and gas, and third in line is the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, it's based on where the most profits come from, where the information is most critical in terms of the dollars that it'll generate. Okay. So security in pharmaceutical industry, it's a major challenge. You want to guard the trade secrets and information on the processes, the supply chain secrets, That's a big thing. So how is the information on the supply chain protected? What is the supply chain? What are the mechanisms? You don't want your adversaries to know what the mechanisms are, because that's where they'll infiltrate once they know what the processes are. Data corruption is another thing. Okay, so they may not only be stealing your data, but they'll go inside and corrupt the data, okay? Data protection through the life cycle, from innovation to exit. So I'm not even talking about when the products are out there in the market, the finished products. It's starting from innovation, the idea, and by the time it exits the marketplace. Even during that time, there are risks. The components, the supply chain, where are you getting your supplies from? Forget how you are marketing and sending it out. Clinical studies, data related to clinical studies. So if an adversary gets into the system, they can change the data. And if an organization does not know that the data has been changed for 200 days, that could be a real problem. Okay, you could go ahead and put out your studies, and your data is compromised. Information on data and use of drugs. This is confidential information. This might contain patient information right there. Licensing and collaborative activities. So prevention of counterfeiting, the RFID technology does provide monitoring on supply chain. So it's the radio frequency IDs that are used. They do provide monitoring throughout the supply chain, and as well as FDA regulation and controls. There are international laws. And at the same time, when you want to put all those protections and tighten the data control, you want to keep the information flexible and available for the users, for the organization, for the management, for the clinicians, for the researchers. There should be data accessibility at the same time when you have IT controls in there. So that's my presentation, and I know we're running short of time, so I'll hand it out, and if you have any questions, we'll be right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for scaring the hell out of us. I'll now ask the panelists to come up and take a seat. We have a microphone circulating in the crowd, and any questions that you have, now is the time to ask our panelists. We'll do.
We're going to walk around with the mics.
Yes. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes to do this, and then.
Switch this off, right?
Yeah, we don't want the shadows. Who's first? Yes.
For counterfeiting drugs and pharmaceuticals any different than the penalties for, say, handbags or
It really depends, actually. A lot of times it is, because it's a scheduled, Schedule 1 through 4, it can be. And it depends on the case, honestly. A lot of times it's a case-by-case basis, but like I said, if it's a Scheduled 1 through 4 narcotic, then definitely the penalty would be much more stricter than a handbag, typical handbag coming in the country, yeah. And I think that our agents like to, since it's a health and safety issue also, you're not going to be killed by buying a counterfeit handbag, but if you take a bad pill, it could be potentially disastrous. So I think they try to chase the pill pushers a little bit more than the handbag pushers.
You've hit on a big issue, though. On a global basis, the penalties are insufficient. And that's one of the things that we are working on as an industry and law enforcement, are increasing those penalties. We have recently had some legislation in the U.S. passed that increased penalties for cargo theft, recognizing that that represents a significant patient safety risk. But on a global basis, that's an issue we still need to work on.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for Brian on RX 360. You had 3 main areas of focus, and within them about 15 sub-items. And I was wondering if you had done any kind of ROI on the 15 sub-items, and if so, what might have been the top 3 in terms of getting the biggest bang for the buck?
Well, I think the one that in the early phases of RX 360 that really stood out was our information sharing. And that was hitting markets around the world. I was in China talking to the CFDA and the US FDA in China, and the regulators in China, the first thing they said about RX 360 was the transparency of information from our website and the intelligence that is being openly shared with anybody in the industry as well as regulators. So I think information sharing provided our first ROI, reasonable ROI. I think now, the supply chain security white papers, for different businesses, different markets, those papers may be more or less applicable. But I think as a consortia, those have really gained a lot of traction with the industry and with regulators. And the auditing programs are probably where we're struggling the most to try to get that uptake in industry. So at a high level, that's where I'd sort of put our priorities and the return on investment.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, how big of an issue is product diversion, meaning that Pfizer, let's say, sells to a third world country at a low cost, and then that product is diverted to a high cost country? Do you see that to be a major issue?
It's a major issue. It happens a lot. I don't know if I have any statistics or data on it, but drug diversion happens all the time, where product A is supposed to be shipped to market A and it ends up in market Z. So, and it's price arbitrage is the primary driver for that, in my opinion. But the patient safety implications of that often get missed, right? So if somebody is going to illegally divert product, they're not going to manage and control that product as it should be. So if Pfizer donates product for humanitarian aid purposes to Africa, contraceptives, which are a sterile injectable cold chain product, and we end up finding it in Iraq, I can guarantee you that product has not been handled appropriately, and it could be quite dangerous. So drug diversion is a big patient safety issue and a big issue on a global basis.
From a financial standpoint, it's probably 4 times as large as counterfeit itself because, again, there's nothing illegal in many markets, particularly like the European Union. Within those countries, pricing arbitrage happens every day and it's legal. So you sell into a small country like Greece, low-price country, it's then transshipped by distributors there and brokers there into the UK or Germany and making that price advantage. In the Asian countries, the same thing. Distributors make as much money. If you're a local distributor in Vietnam, you will make more money shipping across to China even, where it might be a higher priced market than local. So Brian's absolutely right. While the pricing arbitrage is a financial issue for companies, the fact that these products are not handled, stored, maintained, and often the transshipping includes a label change. Instructions for use may be lost or mistranslated. So now you do have patient issues that you don't know how to take these drugs. So pricing arbitrage in itself is not a problem. What's the problem is the fact that when you transship, you're losing a lot of the integrity of the product and its use. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so we have sophisticated, processes to label individual units with unique information, and not including the track and trace and serialization stuff that's coming. We put unique identifiers on our product. We put those unique identifiers on shippers, on pallets that is tracked throughout the system until it gets into the market. And where a pharma company loses track of that or sight of that is when it's sold on to wholesalers or secondary distributors, and that trail starts to get a little bit harder to track. The information on the product, the pallets, the shippers, et cetera, is still there, but the ability, once it leaves our control, for us to be able to track it becomes more difficult, and thus, some of the track and trace legislation that's coming out right now.
So the laws are driving this interoperability among all trading partners. So one of the first vulnerabilities is that when a pharmaceutical company, as Brian mentioned, sells their product at the first handoff to a legitimate wholesaler, the product changes title, and in theory, the pharmaceutical manufacturer doesn't have any control any longer over the flow of those goods. It's now in the hands of a wholesaler who sells to another distributor, maybe to a dispenser or an administrator of the drug, but that could be laterally traded across the industry. So the laws are saying, look, everyone's got to share information or at least have the capability of tracing an insult or an incident back upstream, even if you don't have visibility to each other's flow of goods.
But your point is that it's a complex global market, and the inability to track and trace products around the world is opportunities for somebody to infiltrate the legitimate supply chain.
Question?
Is there a risk of collusion with RX360 since you talk about information sharing? And I think I noticed in one of the slides that there was like auditing, finance, pricing, so just curious.
Yeah, the answer is no, because the secretariat for the consortia is actually a law firm, and their number one role is ensuring compliance to antitrust. So our entire business model as a consortia was approved by the Department of Department of Justice. Mm-hmm. So we vetted our business model, and we have lawyers on all the calls to make sure that we're not colluding.
You may want to comment about the pricing thing, because pricing is definitely not discussed in terms of commercial.
I mean, so every meeting that we have is opened up by a lawyer that says we are here to monitor your compliance to antitrust, and we will not have pricing discussions, and that's what their job is. So it's actually pretty tight.
With universal health care, do we see any additional pressures, certainly on the data sharing, but again, throughout even the physical distribution of pharmaceuticals?
Can you expand on what you mean with universal health care?
Well, there's cost pressures, profitability issues,
Sure.
et cetera, that we're all speculating about in the future. And I was just wondering if there was anything that you perhaps foresee in terms of, when you mentioned physicians bringing in their own prescription drugs, it just sparked some interest in me. And then, of course, with data security, because there's so much data now on the web.
Yeah. I think the whole market, our whole business model is changing. I think Ron had a couple of points up on his bullet. So the markets with which we're selling products, the areas where we're manufacturing products are driven by a lot of business dynamics. So many large pharma companies don't have those discovery pipelines for the big mega drugs like we did 20 years ago. Many companies are now starting to compete in the generic space. That's driving price pressures. Access to safe medicines and affordable medicines in emerging markets are driving price pressures. That's driving our manufacturing strategies. That's increasing risk, and that's why a lot of our programs, as we started to see the shift many years ago, that's what really drove the creation of Pfizer's supply chain security program, is we recognize to get safe, affordable medicines to some of these emerging markets, our pricing structures are going to have to change, and our strategies around manufacturing are going to have to change, but we still need to protect the integrity of our product. As an example of the global, universal pharmaceutical supply chain changing.
I think one fear in the U.S. is if the legislators, well-intended legislators, decide that citizens of the U.S. can have access to more affordable medicines by relaxing the laws of importation, I think that's going to invite in a flood of challenges relative to the influx of counterfeits that exist overseas. So fortunately, that hasn't happened. There's a limited amount of drugs that you can import for personal use across the borders, but if that is opened up, then Anthony and his staff are going to have a lot more work to do.
Thank you.
It seems to me today we're going to attack China. I'm from China, by the way. But I would like to put a cultural perspective on this, and specifically for the U.S. custom. Pharmaceuticals, in Chinese, they believe in herb medicine, or we call it Chinese medicine. So whenever, for example, my 86 years old father-in-law depend on that, they mail to here every month. And they're so afraid That because you don't know what herb medicine was inside. So what's the perspective on this, please?
I don't think we're so much worried about the herbal medicine. The stuff that we're seeing coming from China is 10,000 pills of Viagra coming in with the fake packaging and with the holograms, as Ron said before. These are professional counterfeiters. We're not worried about the herbal medicines that you know grandma sends to grandpa over the United States, or you send it to the family. That's not a concern of us. That stuff we don't really look for. We have bigger fish to fry.
Yes, Tim?
So there's innovation in the name of this conference or this title, right? So I have a question for Tony. When you showed your slide of, it was one of the slides, and you had the means. So there was express, there was mail, there was cargo, and then there was this category called other. So what are the innovative means that fall into other that the bad guys are bringing stuff in on?
Well, it could be, we see at the border, at the southern border and the northern border, Canada and Mexico, people actually carrying them over the border. That would be considered other, I think. We've seen pills strapped to the bottom, popping my peas here in the microphone. Pills strapped to people's bodies, actually. They have vests where they could smuggle the counterfeit, actually Viagra was smuggled into the country, taped to the people's bodies, so that could be considered other. Flying over, passenger realm, flying over from the countries, they could smuggle it in suitcases, they could smuggle it on their bodies, they could swallow it. I haven't seen the swallowing yet, that's mostly heroin, cocaine, and then marijuana, but I'm sure it's happened, and I'm sure it's gonna happen. Any way to make a buck, they'll figure it out. So I think the other would be the actual person, the personnel smuggling it over the border themselves.
Okay, Tony?
This is for Brian and Tony. So you're looking for a needle in a haystack, even at one airport. So does the pharma industry ever see allowing U.S. Customs or ICE access to its supply chain system?
Yes, there's an initiative that's taking place around the world. It's called the IWM, the world. What it is, a shared database where a pharmaceutical company can provide images and detail into a database that all customs agents around the world have access to, that would say, this is what the package looks like, here's where the serial number is, here's where the product information is, here maybe even be some secret marks that we put on, some covert markings or overt logos that are hidden in a certain area of the package. And then if an agent anywhere in the participating country has a question, they can go onto that website, bring forward actually it's a three-dimensional image that also rotates so you can see all sides of the package and any other information that could inform the agent as to whether or not this is a good package. So that's just starting over the last couple of years. I don't know how many companies have signed up, but generally it's been well received by the pharmaceutical industry that we're willing to share that information in a secure database that agents have access to. Well, two things. One is if you're within Pfizer and you're shipping from one Pfizer location to another, is that what you're referring to? Or is it goods now in the distribution system? Right? Because it's different as to who's doing the importing or exporting of that goods if it's a shipment that has already left the manufacturer's purview. An authorized distributor list, you mean? Who the ADRs are?
No, just sitting there at the tarmac, we want to know, is this real from the supply chain system?
So Tony, there are two aspects of it. One is the documentation that's supporting that shipment. That could be authenticated by whoever the importer-exporter is. The other would be the integrity of the product, the authentication, and for that, the manufacturer would be called in, right? So there are two different investigations that could be triggered by a suspect shipment. One is the chain of custody of the shipment, and the other is the integrity of the product inside. But generally,
I mean, we know Pfizer's coming from X country, and it's Pfizer to Pfizer. We know the supply chain, the major supply chains of the major companies coming in on a port-to-port basis. Even the smaller ports, if it's coming into a new supply chain. Actually, we have something going on now that we're working with a pharmaceutical company who's shipping in from Germany to Cleveland for the first time. It's the new supply chain. It's a new FDA-approved drug. So it's a new supply chain, a new drug. The port's never seen it before. To prevent any delays, we're working with the pharmaceutical company now to get all the paperwork in order, work with FDA, get everything in order. So when that drug, and it's a refrigerated drug, so it's time-sensitive freight. So when that does hit the border in Cleveland, we'll be able to expedite it as soon as possible. So we're working with the company before it's even shipped. So those are the type of things we're trying to do with the CEE. When we get more staff, I think those are more of the things that we'll work with the companies. And now we know this company can ship it to Cleveland at any time. They know they won't have a problem with customs, at least customs and FDA. Hopefully we work with the FDA also. And this refrigerated drug will get through in no time. So it's a government-private partnership, again, working to everyone's benefit. We don't get to hold it. It doesn't take up space on the docks or in the airport, and you get your drug quicker, and the consumers get their drug, keeps the economy working. So we are doing certain things like that for the future. But
one more, perhaps? Yes. Song.
Thank you. So different pharmaceutical companies will have deployed different anti-counterfeiting technologies, and will they provide to the custom officers the detection method? They will pay for it, or the custom officer have to purchase those?
as far as counterfeiters,
anti-counterfeiting strategies, like technology to detect anti-counterfeiting
yes.
counterfeit products.
Actually, we do. There's a TrueScan device. I don't know if you've ever heard of TrueScan device, which the drug companies actually introduced to us, which it used lasers, and when we get the spectrum from the drug company of what the drug is made of, all we'd have to do is put the pill into the device, and it could tell if it's the actual pill is counterfeit or not by the active ingredient. So that's something that they've introduced to us, and Customs has bought 20 of those machines actually that we distributed throughout the whole entire country. So now we have a device, even though we could probably tell by just looking at the pill, now we've become such professional and experts at it for such training, and we've seen so many of it. Now we can actually seize it based on the actual active ingredient of the pill based on that technology.
That's Raman spectroscopy.
Right.
Used. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Thank you very much.
was
I'd
just-
like to, yes.
No, I was just going to add that, a lot of pharmaceutical companies will work with customs and border organizations around the world and help with training, developing capability, and from a technology perspective. I mean, it's in our best interest that they're effective in their jobs, and we're happy to help support them in any way, and frequently do.
Well, thank you for your attention and your good questions. I'd like to personally thank Anthony, Brian, and Kiron for contributing to this innovation conference, and I hope you all got something out of it.